So the Buddhist teachings were given in a very, very different world. The people he gave them to from a very, very different culture. I mean, they had different strengths, different weaknesses, different talents, different needs. They not only used a different language, the whole background of the way they understood the world was different. How they saw the meaning of life was different from the ones that we've grown up with and that we take completely for granted as being what all sane people think. But they thought their way of seeing things was what all sane people thought. So those ancient Buddhist teachings, they often need translating. If they're going to have any meaning and relevance to us. And when I say translating, I don't just mean from one language to another. I don't just mean from Pali or Sanskrit into English. I mean they need translating from one culture to another and from one worldview to another. And a lot of that work of translation has been done for us by the man who founded the Triratna Buddhist order, Sangharakshita, who had very wide experience of different schools of Buddhism in the East in his time as a monk, and a very deep understanding of Western culture. So he was very ideally placed to do this work of translation. And often in this series we'll be looking at how he took a traditional Buddhist teaching and, as it were, translated it for our times and our culture. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next few months, looking at these traditional teachings and bringing them back home, as it were. And that's what I'm going to be doing tonight. I'm going to be looking at the Buddha's teaching of what's called conditioned co-production, and see what that can mean in practical terms in how we live our life. And I'll be linking that to the subject of last week's talk, which was dukkha, the Buddha's teaching on suffering and dissatisfaction. And what I'll be doing is explaining how Sangharakshita has presented an aspect of conditioned co-production that's usually ignored in traditional Buddhism, but which is really crucial for us in the present-day West. And I'll be looking at how the way we can respond to suffering and discomfort and dissatisfaction is the key to making conditioned co-production work for us rather than against us. So last week, Aryadasa talked about the Buddha's very first teaching, the Four Noble Truths. And he talked specifically about the first of these noble truths, which he's put down here as suffering. It's actually, the word is dukkha. Dukkha in Pali. And it's often translated as suffering. But the root means something like ill-fitting or unsatisfactory, something like that. So it includes actual pain, actual suffering, but it also includes less extreme discomfort, sometimes translated as stress, discomfort, dissatisfaction. The experience that the life we're living is it's not doing what we want it to do. It's not satisfying or fulfilling. So the first of those Four Noble Truths is that life as it's normally lived contains this inescapable element of dukkha. And in the West that's often been translated as, well, Buddhists think that life is suffering. Very strange, they seem to be quite cheerful, but they think life is suffering. Can't quite have got their own message but that's not what the Buddha was saying. He wasn't saying life is suffering. Of course there's pleasure and happiness and joy in... No? I don't know, I'm getting messages from people here. Of course it includes joy, happiness, pleasure. But there's also that inescapable element of dukkha. And it's most painful. We all experience loss, bereavement, illness, pain, and ultimately, although we don't like to think about it, death. There is actual suffering in life and we can't escape it. And at a less extreme level, a lot of our life is characterised by discomfort or dissatisfaction. We're often constantly dissatisfied, constantly wanting more, wanting something else, wanting to be distracted, or at least have something to look forward to, constantly on the run from boredom. Wanting to be distracted and entertained, wanting to avoid uncomfortable situations. And we can't describe that as actual suffering, but there's just that element of dissatisfaction, discomfort. So as Ariadasa said last week, the very first part of the Buddhist teaching tells us that life involves dukkha. It involves actual physical pain and sickness and loss that we can't escape because we've got this body, this fragile body. And while we're not enlightened, it also involves all the more mental suffering we bring upon ourselves, as well as also involving the sort of base level dissatisfaction that characterises so much of our normal unenlightened state. Wanting more, wanting to be distracted and entertained, looking forward to the next bit of pleasure, not able to just be and enjoy stillness and simplicity and contentment. And then the second noble truth goes on to say that they analyse the cause of dukkha, which is variously sort of translated as either selfish grasping or grasping at a self, sort of related meanings. The third truth says, hey, yes, there's a way beyond it. There is a way beyond dukkha. And the fourth truth says that that way is to follow a progressive, structured spiritual path that leads us towards becoming the sort of being who experiences inner fulfillment that's not dependent on outer conditions. Entertainment, pleasure, possessions, and so on. So the Buddha's first teaching was all about dukkha and the way beyond dukkha, as Ariadasa told us last week. And there were times when the Buddha said this was entirely what his teaching was about. So that's what Ariadasa kept saying last week. This is entirely what the Buddha's teaching was about. Dukkha and the way beyond dukkha. But there were other times when the Buddha also said that the core of his teaching was something else, something more profound, something even more profound, which in Sanskrit is called Paticca Samuppada. We usually translate that as conditioned co-production. Conditioned co-production. Sometimes it's translated as dependent arising. I've seen it translated as mutual co-arising. Take your pick. And an understanding of what conditioned co-production means, it can be applied to the problem of dukkha and the way beyond dukkha, but it can be applied to just about anything else. It can be applied to the way our minds work. It can be applied to the way the stars work. It can be applied to what you see under a microscope. It can be applied to the weather. You can apply it to just about anything. It's got to do with the way, well, I'll say a bit more about what it's got to do with. So the Buddha applies it to the problem of dukkha, but it goes beyond that. But of course, the problem of dukkha is what's most important to us. That's what we want to do, isn't it? We want to get away from dissatisfaction and go beyond dukkha. So, but first of all, so I'll come back to that. I'll come back to the connection between the two. But first of all, I'd like to say just a little bit about conditioned co-production as a general sort of principle. So, it means, we translate it as conditioned co-production. Paticca means depending, depending on, dependent. Utpada means arising, coming into being. Sam, well, there's a little bit of controversy about this, but it probably means the same. Same arising depending upon. Well, that's not very... Arise the same, yeah, something like that. Okay, so there's some dispute about that fourth one, but yeah, something like that. Certainly according to the influential 4th century commentator, Buddhaghosa, Sam means the same. It's the same root as our same. Something enough. So this is what Buddha Gosha says about what conditioned co-production means at the sort of total level, and you need to listen carefully. This totality of causes is a condition for the totality of states that are produced. Phenomena exist in mutual independence. Together, interdependence. Phenomena exist in mutual interdependence. I can't even read it, it's so complicated. Together, in combination, they produce a common fruit, and none can be dispensed with. It is a co-arising, since states occur in association and in mutual independence. This total conditionality, acting interdependently, arouses states equally together. This conditionality makes states arise together and simultaneously, not piecemeal and successively. This is why it's called conditioned co-production. Got that? The totality of causes is a condition for the totality of states. What's it saying? It's sort of saying you can't separate. What we tend to do is we think of the world as lots of little separate bits, sort of interacting with each other like billiard balls. And this is saying there's this completely seamless flux of physical and psychological, mental, spiritual things going on, in which you can't take this bit out and that bit out and say that's completely separate. States arise together and simultaneously, not piecemeal and successively. And he doesn't talk about things. There's no things talked about there. It's just states. So the world is a verb. The world is moving on. The world is a process, not a collection of separate things. I'm going to read it again. The totality of causes is a condition for the totality of states that are produced. Everything produces the next everything, not this produces that. Phenomena exist in mutual interdependence. Well, that's what we talk about when we talk about non-self, isn't it? Phenomena exist in mutual interdependence. Together, in combination, they produce a common fruit. And none can be dispensed with. You can't sort of cut Andy out of this situation and expect the situation to still be here, any more than you can take a part of your dream out and sort of have it exist as a separate thing. Or you can take a whirlpool that's in a river out and have it exist separately from the river. It's a co-arising since states occur in association and mutual independence. The total conditionality, acting interdependently, arouses states equally. States arise together and simultaneously, not piecemeal and successively. Okay? All right, I'll forget all that now. We'll talk about something a bit easier. Okay. That's the principial level. The fact that all phenomena, material and mental, in our minds, in the universe, they all intimately interact and mutually co-produce each other. There are no separate independent things. The world we experience is a flux of events, all mutually affecting each other like eddies in a stream, whirlpools and currents in a stream. And that's saying something quite profound, but I think for practical reasons, for our day-to-day spiritual life, we can completely ignore it. We could in fact simplify conditioned co-production down to the fact that things come into existence because of conditions. One thing leads to another, and if the first thing doesn't happen, the second thing doesn't happen. In fact, we could almost simplify it down to what look very much like chains of cause and effect. When this thing happens, that thing happens. When that thing happens, that thing happens. Conditioned co-production is not just cause and effect, and the Buddha made that plain. We all know about cause and effect. When the Buddha's close companion Ananda said, well, this conditioned co-production it's really quite simple. The Buddha said famously, say not so, Ananda, say not so. And presumably he was thinking it was cause and effect. Say not so, it's profound, subtle, beyond the realm of words, beyond our normal understanding. It can only be understood by the truly wise. So it's something beyond our understanding. And that controversy about whether it's simple cause and effect or something much, much more intangible, obviously was going on in the 4th century, because Buddha Gosha again says, some see it as simple arising due to conditions. This is a shallow understanding that does not allow any profound understanding anyway. And now I've lost my place, excuse me. So, conditioned co-production is pointing towards something more profound than cause and effect, but as I've said, for practical purposes of our spiritual life, we can forget about that unless we want to meditate on it deeply. And we can simplify it down to the fact that one thing depends on another. Things happen when the conditions for them exist, and they don't happen when the conditions don't exist. When the conditions exist for a plant to grow, there's sunshine and rain and fertilizer, the plant grows. When the conditions exist for us to grow, we grow. Now, the Pali Canon gives lots of examples of the way conditioned. The Pali Canon is the earliest records of the teaching of the historical, but it gives loads of examples of the way conditioned co-production works, individual ways that conditioned co-production could work. Either it can work to keep us stuck in our ruts, or it can work to propel us towards positive change. And it's these sort of, what are called nidana chains of events that the Buddha really emphasised, because they're the most important for our spiritual life. And the most common of these nidana chains, these formulations of this happens, therefore that happens, therefore that happens, is called the 12 links on the Buddhist Wheel of Life. The 12 links, the 12 nidanas, and they're illustrated around the edge of this Wheel of Life. So we've got all sorts of things going on here. We've got somebody dying, we've got somebody ill, we've got somebody picking fruit, we've got somebody having a drink, we've got all sorts going on here. But they're illustrations of stages in this 12 links of conditioned co-production, the Nidana chain. Now, I could try to explain each of these links to you and how they relate. And that would be very difficult, and it would take the whole talk. And frankly, I'm not sure it would do much good. I'm not sure it would change your approach to life. I don't think it would make you allow you to live a more fulfilled life. It needs translating. And probably the simplest translation we could come up with for what it's saying is that our past, how we behaved in our past, creates the person we are in the present. And the person we are, how we behave in the present, the way we act in the present, creates our future. So our past has conditioned us to respond in a particular way, so we do what we do in the present, and then what we do in the present by the law of karma creates the person we become in the future, and the world we experience in the future, and round we go. Deepening certain strands in our being, how we act now creates the person we become in the future. So if we don't do something about it, we're stuck in an endless loop. What happens in the future is determined by the past, and the whole machine of pratichet samutpada grinds on, and we're like a cog in it with no freedom of action. We're just cogs in this machine. And the traditional approach, the approach of the Theravada school of Southeast Asia, Buddhism of Southeast Asia to this problem, this vicious circle. The way out of this vicious circle is to just stop the wheel. Stop the wheel. So we've got this bit down here. We've got a woman in bed with a man. That is contact. Something contacts our sense organs. Feeling a man with an arrow in his eye. And craving somebody having a drink. Right, okay. And so feeling, our contact with the world leads to craving, leads to certain feelings of I like it, I don't like it, and that leads to us to either grasp at things or push them away. And if we just break that, if we don't crave for satisfaction, if we just stop doing that, we put a spoke in a spinning wheel and stop it, and problem solved. That's the sort of traditional approach of certainly of the Theravada school, the only school in huge part of the Buddhist world. Just stop the wheel, put a spoke in it. I don't know if you've ever had experience of just putting a spoke into a wheel. It's really not very pleasant, actually. I don't know about you, but that doesn't work for me. It doesn't really work for me. Maybe it's my sort of background, in the West or whatever. Not just not doing, just don't do it. Just don't do it. That doesn't seem likely to be the solution for me, actually. Doesn't seem realistic. Just don't do what you usually do. I think we have to do something else, positive, instead of what we usually do. Now, okay, that idea of just stopping the wheel obviously made sense in the worldview that the Theravada emerged from, but I don't think it's likely to make much sense to us. I think it needs translating. It's one of those things that needs translating. And it's something that Sangharakshita has translated. And actually, funnily enough, in the Pali Canon, the oldest and fullest record of the Buddha's historical Buddhist teaching, which is the scriptures that the Theravada base themselves on, or say they base themselves on, there are loads and loads of examples of how the way off the wheel is to do something else instead, not just to stop. There are loads of examples. How when we do something creative, instead of just reacting in the way that we've been conditioned to act, conditioned co-production starts to act in a positive direction, a completely different way. So how this flux of interlocking processes, instead of just taking us round and round in circles, starts to take us onwards to new places, better places, and how these better places lead on to ever better places again. So that eventually some quite wonderful things can happen. Something completely different can come into existence, something completely new. We can become better and better people, more and more alive, more and more wise, warm, energetic, free, creative. And the conditioned co-production is the current that can carry us towards that. And then when we come together with others who are also stepping off the wheel and doing something different, we can set up this positive current between us and create a better world. A better world can come into existence among us. But this whole aspect of conditioned co-production, this positive side, gets largely ignored in the traditional Theravadan presentations. Just stop the wheel. So this teaching needs a bit of translation. It needs a bit of translation for us. And this translation, I think, involves going back and rediscovering, re-emphasizing the whole positive side of conditioned co-production. And this is what Sangha actually did in the very, very early days of our Buddhist movement, his work in the UK. He pointed out that co-conditioned co-production doesn't just take us round and round in circles when we react in our usual way to situations, so we need to focus on stopping. He showed how it also takes us onwards and upwards. It can take us onwards and upwards when we stop reacting automatically and act creatively, taking us to higher and freer and wiser mental states. So in the very early days, someone might be able to tell me when exactly of our new Buddhist movement, Sangha actually gave a talk called Mind, Reactive and Creative. And in that he describes two kinds of mind. So the reactive mind, he describes a reactive mind which responds to what happens on the basis of past conditioning. The world pushes our buttons and we react automatically on the basis of past conditioning. So the reactive mind, I'll read you what he says about the reactive mind. The reactive mind can appropriately be described as the coin in the slot mind. Insert the coin and out comes the packet. In much the same way, when the reactive mind is confronted with a certain situation or experience, it will react automatically and in an entirely mechanical, predictable fashion. Not only our behaviour, but even much of our thinking conforms to this pattern. He's put thinking in inverted commas. Much of our thinking conforms to this pattern. In the field of politics or literature or religion or the affairs of everyday life, the opinions we so firmly hold and so confidently profess are very rarely the outcome of conscious reflection, of our individual effort to arrive at the truth. Our ideas are hardly ever our own. Only too often they have been fed to us from external sources, from books, newspapers and conversations, and we have accepted them, or rather received them, in a passive and unreflecting manner. When the appropriate stimulus occurs, we automatically reproduce whatever has been fed into our system, and this is purely mechanical reaction that passes for expression of opinion. That really brings to mind for me what used to happen when I got into political arguments with my father. He was this guy who I used to react to when I was 13, and when he said something, out it would come. And maybe we should ask ourselves that, how much of our sort of thoughts and worldview we've actually thought through, and how much of it we just take on board. We just take on board, or it's an emotional response to something. We didn't like our dad, we didn't get on with our dad, so we react to authority. Or we really did, so we like authority, etc., etc. So, the reactive mind responds to what happens on the basis of past conditioning. He says it's mechanical, it's a coin in the slot mind. He tells us that it's repetitive, because it's programmed in a way that's largely unconscious, so we always react to the same stimuli in the same way. So it traps us in habit, it traps us in routine, it traps us in patterns that grow like weeds and choke our life if we're not careful. And he tells us that it's unaware, it just responds in an unaware way without making an aware choice. And in contrast, he said the creative mind is the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite. Instead of being ruled by the stimuli it comes into contact with, it's above that. It's active on its own account. So instead of reacting like a machine when the world pushes our buttons, its buttons, if we activate the creative mind, we become the boss. We become in charge of our own lives. The creative mind responds rather than reacts. It's independent, not dependent on what happens around it. Being non-conditioned, it's free. Whereas the reactive mind is the prisoner of the past. It's responsive in that it can respond with positive emotion to others despite whatever the feeling that happens to be there. So it leads to better personal relationships. It leads us to more appropriate responses to the world. It allows us to stop being part of the problem and become part of the solution. become part of making the world a better place. So the creative mind is aware, it responds on the basis of awareness, and it's intensely alive, he says. It's intensely alive. So this is a bit of classic Sangha. Were such expressions permissible? He's about to tell us, but he's already told us it's not really permissible. Were such expressions permissible, one might say that it is the spirit of life itself, rising up from the fountainhead like a fountain from the infinite depths of existence and vivifying through the creative person all of whom it comes into contact with. So, it's like life, whereas the reactive mind is like not life. So what's the connection with conditioned co-production? In that same talk on mind, reactive and creative, Sangha gave 2 connected images. We've had the 12 Vadanas, but I'm not an artist. He came up with 2 connected images. And one is the image of the wheel, that one, going round and round in circles. The past governs the present creates the future. The traditional wheel of life, mind in the reactive mode. And he added to that the image of the spiral. The image of a spiral breaking free from that boring circular wheel when we do something creative, taking a positive upward direction, rather higher and higher, rather than just round and round. So the creative mind lets us break free from the wheel, takes us onto the spiral, upwards towards better and better mental states, better and better experience of the world. And in the talk, Sangha tells us that the point where the creative spiral breaks free from the reactive wheel is, again, down here, between feeling and craving. Between those 2 links in the chain of 12 nidanas, the link between feeling and craving. So we've got contact, some sort of sense impression, something we see or hear or something we think, because the mind is a sense organ in Buddhism. Something pushes our buttons. When this happens, there's a feeling we're not even usually aware of. Comfort, I like it, it feels comfortable. Or, I don't like that, it's uncomfortable. And these feelings don't tell us anything about whether the thing is beneficial. I mean, to the smoker, the cigarette gives comfort, looks comfortable. They don't tell us anything about it, they just tell us about our conditioning. But on the basis of that feeling, which we're not even usually consciously aware of, we get craving. And this could take the form of attraction. I want it. Give me the cream cake. Or aversion. I don't want it. Go away. Anger, fear, anxiety. Don't want to do that. Don't want it. Those sorts of response. And what we call the gap, which you'll remember from the second night of the introductory course, or the point of freedom, is traditionally between feeling and craving. If we don't respond to the feeling in our usual way, reaching for the biscuit or avoiding the uncomfortable situation, procrastinating about the bit of work that makes us feel stressed, if we don't do that, then we're in the gap. We have some freedom. We can do something different. So we use a slightly different terminology. You might remember on our intermediate course, on our introductory course, we use a slightly different terminology. Usually the gap is seen between feeling and craving. We use the technology of stimulus, feeling, usual response, because people find that easier, actually. And because often we're not aware of the distinction between feeling and craving. If you ask a smoker what they feel when coffee break comes around, they're likely to say craving. The two aren't separate. But whichever terms we use, we're talking about the same thing. When the world pushes our buttons, we don't do the automatic reactive thing. We become aware and do something different, skillful and creative. We step off the wheel, onto the spiral. And when we do this, conditioned co-production starts to work for us, rather than keeping us trapped. We find ourselves in a better place, more empowered, more energetic, more free, living in a slightly better world. And from that better place, we can move to a better place again, and again, and again. And this works with outer events, but it also works with just in our mind. Changing the way we use our mind in meditation from our usual reactive mode to a more creative mode can take us out of our normal mental states towards states of greater and greater awareness and clarity and positive emotion and even bliss. So when we think of that fourth person in the metta bhavana, our usual response is grrr. If we choose to think of them in a different way, and there is a choice, we've immediately put ourselves in the gap, we've immediately put ourselves on the spiral. So where does dukkha come in? Where does dukkha come in? Well, actually it's central, going back to last week's talk. How we respond to dukkha, how we respond to everything from actual pain to discomfort and dissatisfaction is the key to whether we get in the gap, whether we get off the wheel, into the gap and up the spiral, or whether we just go back round and round. Our usual reactive response to dukkha is to try to avoid it. We can do this by constantly trying to distract ourselves. I think I'll look at my phone. Let's have a cream cake. Let's have a beer. Let's watch the telly. Let's constantly distract ourselves. Constantly distract ourselves. Looking forward to the next pleasure. Whatever it takes to get our mind off our underlying dukkha. So when a stimulus gives us a pleasant feeling, we go for it. No more dukkha for a little while. And then there's some after a bit. And of course, when something gives us an unpleasant or uncomfortable feeling, we avoid it or we get angry about it. So we avoid the challenge of trying to connect with that person that we find a bit difficult. We avoid the discomfort of getting out of bed to meditate. We avoid the discomfort of tackling that job that makes us feel a bit stressed. So both our craving and our aversions are ways that we avoid dukkha, that underlying dukkha. And even more than that, all of our repetitive patterns, all the ways we go around the wheel, they all are about avoiding discomfort. The discomfort we feel when we step out of our comfort zone and do something different. Doing something different always feels uncomfortable. Stepping out of our comfort zone always feels uncomfortable. Excuse me, I'm just going to check the time. Yeah, stepping out of our comfort zone always feels uncomfortable. That's why it's a comfort zone. Outside it, it's uncomfortable. And staying in our comfort zone is the way we go round and round the wheel. It's the way we stay trapped. There's a lovely story I heard long ago about this, about how, this might be completely apocryphal, about how they train elephants in certain parts of India, which I'm told, when the elephant is very, very young, they tie it to a stake around its neck. And the elephant's supposed to work shifting wood or something in this particular area. So as a young elephant, it's got a thing around its neck and it trundles off. And every time it gets to the end of its tether, it goes, "Whoa!" And it experiences discomfort, pain. So after a while, the young elephant ceases to, when it gets near the end, it starts, I'm not doing that. So it just stays in its comfort zone. And even long after, long after it could pull the stake out of the ground, it carries on doing this. And eventually they can just take this tether away. And the elephant is imprisoned by its own fear of the discomfort of going beyond its zone. And we can be just like that. And that's just another way of talking about the wheel of life, actually. Being trapped by what feels comfortable to us. So, to step off the wheel, to get out of the comfort zone, we have to turn and face discomfort. We have to turn and face our dukkha, and do the different creative thing anyway, despite the fact that it feels uncomfortable. If we try to hide from our dukkha, we just go round the wheel again. There's a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I don't know if people have come across that. I have no idea whether it's a good book, but it's a cracking title. Feel the fear and do it anyway. I mean, feel the whatever, feel the anxiety, feel that whatever you like. To get off the wheel onto the spiral, we have to feel whatever form the discomfort takes and do it anyway. I remember many years ago, ages and ages ago, and for some reason I was in Edinburgh at the time, and an order member was giving a talk about this using a sort of scientific graph. A scientific graph. This is to appeal to those of us scientific temperament. Oops, not that one. And he talked about this as hump wrestling. He said, to get anywhere in life, we have to learn to wrestle humps. And we have a graph here with discomfort going that way and comfort and pleasant feelings going that way. So that's got a little, and time in that direction. And he says to get from here, where we are, to a better place, we always have to go over a hump of discomfort. Getting fit, losing weight, learning to meditate. You name it. To get to a better, healing that relationship that's going to involve talking to that person that just feels really difficult, making that apology. You name it. To get to a better place, we have to learn to go over a hump. If we don't go over the hump, what should we do, Sean? I think I'll play a game on my computer. There's a little bit of a dip, but over time, the discomfort just gets more and more and more. So hump wrestling is the key, not just to the spiritual life, but to life in general, actually. A life of avoiding humps just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, deeper and deeper ruts. So yeah, to get to a better place, we always have to go first to a place of greater discomfort. So we've heard how Sangha has, it were, translated this aspect of the traditional teaching about conditioned co-production to suit our times by showing that it didn't just involve this rather negative approach, it also involved using conditioned co-production to take us to more and more positive places. It has got a positive side, and it used the image of the spiral added onto the wheel to illustrate this. And we've seen that how we respond to dukkha is the key to whether we're on the wheel or whether we get off it onto the spiral. Only if we face dukkha can we break out of our usual patterns and step onto the spiral. And as a general principle, that's all very well. We need to apply it to our life. I think this business about hump wrestling, I'm eternally grateful to that order member, actually, because I think it just says something about an approach to life, not just to this. But how can we apply it in a more specific... I'm just going to come up with a few ideas to finish about things we can do to apply it in a more specific way. And the first one is really simple. Do things differently for the sake of it. In the very first day of our introductory class, we say, just do something different, just do something different. Very often, our patterns that we get into through the wheel of life just lock up, and there doesn't seem to be any space in our lives. I mean, so often, we talk to people about, well, it'd be really, people would say, well, I really get a lot out of meditation, but, I can't have, there's no space in my life to do it. I thought, well, how about trying for 10 minutes? No, there's not 10 minutes in my life where I could sit down and meditate. And you think, blimey, that life is so locked up in patterns that there's no freedom there. So just doing things differently creates more and more space to do things differently. The second suggestion is change the way we think about discomfort and challenge. So I don't do this anymore because I'm old and decrepit, but I used to go mountain climbing and mountain walking every year, at New Year, heaven help us, I would go to Scotland with a bunch of mates and we'd go up mountains and we'd usually get benighted. There'd be howling winds. Sometimes we'd nearly die. We'd get really, really cold, really, really tired, sometimes really, really frightened, and love it. Because it was a challenge, because it was exhilarating. Now, I used to say that if anyone had asked me to do any of these things as part of my job, I would regard it as abusive and probably sue them. So my response to all that discomfort is entirely up here, actually, entirely up here. And the fact that I took part in that, those very uncomfortable activities actually created some really cracking friendships, for example, with other people. So changing how we think about discomfort and challenge so that we relish it, as we might in sport, as we might when we're getting fit. I mean, if we thought about it, say with sport, I'm not playing that sport because I'll get tired and somebody might kick me. And, you know, I mean, we'd never do anything, would we? So we can change the way we think about discomfort. Look for challenges we can realistically take on, or even unrealistically take on. Even if they scare us, actually relish those challenges, look for them. Set up conditions for conditioned co-production to take us in positive directions. So it tells us we're not independent. We can't just decide who we are. We're not independent. We're part of this overall flux. We can't just decide to change ourselves. We can't just decide to grow. We're rather like a plant. You know, a plant can't think, well, you know, if we want a plant to grow, we can't sort of, what are we going to do? We can't tug it, open its flowers. We set up the conditions for the plant to grow. We give it water, we put it in the sun, we stop the rabbits eating it. So we set up the conditions for the growth of the plant. It's the same with us. We can't decide to become bigger people, but we can decide to put ourselves in the conditions where we will grow. So how might we do that? Some ideas. What are conditions where positive change might come about? Spend more time with the Sangha. Spend more time with the Sangha. The Buddha's absolutely clear on this one. Spiritual development is the whole of the spiritual life. When the heart's release is immature, it's spiritual development that's the key. It's spiritual friendship that's the key to its growth, to its liberation. If we don't have to spend time with the Sangha, if we don't have responsibilities that make that impossible, we could even find ways to live with other Buddhists. Listen to the Dharma, read the Dharma, soak ourselves in the Dharma, so that it soaks into our bones and starts to affect the way we see the world. And finally, as a subset of these set-up conditions, go on retreat. Go on retreat. Our normal conditions keep us the same. That's what conditioned co-production tells us. You know, everything, we can't just decide to be different in our normal conditions. We will probably stay the same, or pretty much. We'll only change slowly. We need to find occasions to put ourselves in different conditions. We go on retreat, we take ourselves out of our normal conditions and put ourselves in very, very supportive conditions for a while. We don't do our usual things, and there's a real opportunity for change, for growth. Second to last, I'm going to say, imagine the self we could be. Imagine the self we could be. Maybe spend time in meditation imagining yourself as you could be, this future wiser self that you could be. And what would they tell you about how to live now? What would they tell you about how to live now? And I'm going to connect that to my very last one, which is slightly more mythic, which is live like a magician. Okay? Live like a magician. Magicians can make magical things happen, bring new things into being. So what do I mean? Okay, there's a myth about the magician Merlin, that he lived backwards. Okay. And what that means is that he started out life as old, and he gradually got younger and younger and younger. It's a myth, okay? So what's it mean? What's it mean? I think living backwards means living the opposite way around to most of us. So most of us live in a way which is dictated by the past. I am this sort of person because past conditions have made me like like that. I can't do this because I've never done it before. I can do that because I've done it before. Because I behaved in that way, in that particular circumstance, that's the sort of person I am, I behave in that way. So we are dictated by the past. Our background, our conditioning dictates us. We live forwards in time, as it were, dictated by the past. I think what it might mean to live backwards, like a magician, is to live in a way that's determined by what could be in the future. Live in a way that's determined by the potentialities which are seeking to come into existence in the future. The reactive mind, Sangharajta's reactive mind, is a mind ruled by the past. It's just acting automatically on the basis of the past. The creative mind is a mind orientated towards the potential that could come into existence in the future. And we can be more like that. We can rule our lives more on what could come into existence in the future rather than what's always been in the past. And if we do that, we free ourselves from the past and we can create something really, really quite splendid. So Sangharajta talks about this spiral, the wheel and the spiral can go up and the spiral can culminate in the Pure Land. It can culminate in a completely different world and a completely different us living in that world. But only if we, as it were, live in a way which is going to bring that into existence rather than living in the way which we've always done, which keeps us going round in circles.